Welcome. My name is Craig Carrel, president of Team One Plastics. And it's my pleasure to have Jeff Mengel, a partner with Plant Moran accounting firm, and really a gentleman who's been steeped in plastics for over 20 years. Jeff, why don't you give a brief introduction to our audience about your background and your experience?
So Plant Moran is a relatively large regional CPA and consulting firm. We got approximately 2,000 people and 20 offices throughout the Midwest and some international. And we're broken up by industry groupings, which is a little bit different than a lot of other firms, professional service firms. So I was in the manufacturing and distribution group and got into the plastics industry as a specific focus to look at back in the early 90s. And as a result of that, got involved in it and learned an awful lot and see it go through its heyday in the 90s and its troubles in the early 2000s and to where we are today, in big trouble with the Great Recession that we had just a couple of years ago. So my focus has gone from growing up as an accountant, auditor, and tax guy to doing a lot in the benchmarking, competitive profiling, strategy development, market intelligence, all in that area in the last 20 years.
And you really have been, we've known each other for maybe not the full 20 years, for many of the years as we've done work with Plant Moran and seen you around at conferences and things. How have you sort of seen the evolution over those 20 years of the plastics industry in general?
Well, it's interesting. People ask me how did I get into it, and it really came down to we had an individual, it was an individual in our consulting group who was he was a chemical engineer, and he's saying, hey, plastics is where we need to go to. It's highly fragmented. There's a lot of people in it, and it is bound to consolidate. They're going to need our services. So we developed some benchmarking programs, and the first one came out in '95, our first benchmarking report that we had, and we've been doing it ever since 1995. So North American Plastics Industry Study, it's pretty in-depth. It's the most in-depth study I've seen out there that gets into a number of different factors: operational, financial, organizational, and strategy and marketing issues. Looking at all those things to try to identify what's happening in the industry, what drives the industry, how do you identify a successful molder versus a struggling molder, what are the attributes. And so we've been doing it for 20 years. Back when it first started, the individual was telling me we need to get into it because it's highly fragmented. Today, 20 years later, it's highly fragmented.
I was thinking that's where you were headed.
So it's still highly fragmented, but it's still a lot smaller. So the average size 20 years ago was around $11 million in sales. Now it's $15 million in sales. So the inflationary, it's about the same size with inflation in there. Could even argue it's even smaller. Mm-hmm. But the number of players at one point was estimated being 12,000. Now it's down to right around 6,000. It's about half. So it has gone down. But there's still a lot of small players in it. There's some big players, still a lot of small players, and there's some very successful companies, thankfully.
Yes, yes. So it's an interesting industry, and we're going to spend the next few video interviews talking about the state of the industry's keys to success and things along those lines. So a final plug for Plant Moran in the benchmarking survey is Team One's participated in that for many, many years. And I would agree with Jeff. It's probably the best survey in the United States to look at how you compete in such a fragmented industry.